Welcome forward here. I'd like to share another pamphleture by Carnegie. This one's entitled A Quick and Easy Way to Learn to Speak in Public. You're probably saying to yourself, is there really a quick and easy way to learn or speak in public, or is that merely an intriguing title that promises more than it delivers? No, I'm not exaggerating. I'm really going to let you in on a vital secret. A secret that will make it easy for you to speak in public immediately. How did I discover this priceless pearl of wisdom? In some book? No. In some college course in speaking? No. I spent years studying public speaking in academic halls, but during all that time I never heard anyone even mention this open sesame that would unlock the treasure cave of effective speaking. I had to discover it the hard way, gradually, slowly, and painfully. If, back in my college days, some white knight in shining armor had given me the password to the kingdom of effective speaking and writing, I would have saved myself years and years of wasted, heartbreaking effort. For example, I once wrote a book on Lincoln, and while writing it, I threw it in the wastebasket, at least a year of wasted effort that might have been saved had I known this great secret that I'm going to divulge to you. The same thing happened when I spent 2 years trying to write a novel. The same thing happened again while writing a book on public speaking, another year of wasted effort thrown into the waste bucket because I didn't know the secret of successful writing and speaking. If possible, spend years in preparation. What is this priceless secret that you have been dangling before your eyes? Just this. Talk about something that you have already earned the right to talk about, though long study or experience. Talk about something that you know and know that you know. Don't spend 10 minutes or 10 hours preparing a talk. Spend 10 weeks or 10 months. Better still, spend 10 years. Talk about something that you have aroused your interest. Talk about something that you have a deep desire to communicate to your listeners. To illustrate what I mean, let's take the case of Gay Kellogg, a household wife from Roselle, New Jersey. Gay Kellogg had never made a speech in public before she joined one of our classes in New York. She was terrified. She feared that public speaking might be a hidden and esoteric art away beyond her abilities. Yet, at the 4th session of the course, as she made an impromptu talk, she held the audience in the palm of her hand. I asked her to speak on, quote, the biggest regret of my life, end quote. 6 minutes after that subject was assigned, Gay Kellogg made a talk that was deeply moving. The listeners could hardly keep their tears back. I know. I could hardly keep the tears from welling up in my own eyes. Her talk went on like this, quote, the biggest regret of my life is that I never knew a mother's love. My mother died when I was only a year old. I was brought up by a succession of aunts and relatives who were all so absorbed in their own children that they had no time for me. I never stayed with any of them very long. They were always sorry to see me come and glad to see me go. They never took any interest in me or gave me any affection. I knew I wasn't wanted. Even as a little child, I could feel it. I often cried myself to sleep because of the loneliness. The deepest desire of my heart was to have someone ask to see my report card for school, but no one ever did. No one ever cared. All I craved as a little child was love, and no one ever gave it to me. End of quote. Had Gay Kellogg spent 10 years preparing that talk? No. She had spent 20 years. She had been preparing herself to make that talk when she cried herself to sleep as a little child. She had been preparing herself to make that talk when her heart ached because no one asked to see her report card from school. No wonder she could talk about that subject. She could have not wiped away any of those memories out of her mind with anything less than dynamite. Gay Kellogg had tapped a gusher of tragic memories and feelings away deep down inside her. She didn't have to pump them up. She didn't have to work at all making that talk. All she had to do was to remove the cap from the gusher and let her pent-up feelings and memories rush up to the surface like oil from a Texas well. Jesus said, quote, "My yoke is easy, my burden is light." End of quote. So is the yoke and burden of good speaking. Poor talks are usually the ones that are written and memorized and sweated over and made artificial. Good talks are the ones that well up within you as a fountain in the garden. Many people talk the way I swim. I struggle and fight the water and wear myself out and go 1/10 as fast as the experts. A poor speaker, like a poor swimmer, gets taut and tense and twists himself up into knots and defeats his own purpose. Become excited about your subject. Even as a man with only mediocre speaking ability may have a superb talk if he will speak about something that he deeply stirs him. I saw a striking illustration of that years ago when I was conducting courses for Brooklyn Chamber of Commerce, Brooklyn, New York. It was an example that I should remember for the rest of my life. It happened like this. We were having a session devoted to an impromptu talks. After the class assembled, I asked the men to speak on, quote, "What, if anything, is wrong with religion?" End of quote. Most of the members made only a fair talk because they hadn't had long or felt deeply about the subject. Their impressions had been weak, and so was their expression. But one member, a man, by the way, who had never finished high school, did something to the audience that I have never seen in any other speakers do in the years I have been training men to speak in public. His talk was so moving that when he finished, every man in the room stood up in silent tribute. This man told about the greatest tragedy of his life, the death of his mother. He was so devastated, so grief-stricken, that he no longer wanted to live. He declared that when he went out of doors, even on a sunny day, it seemed as if he were wandering in a fog. He longed to die. In desperation, he went to his church and knelt and wept and said the rosary, and a great peace came over him, a divine peace of resignation. Quote, "Not my will, but thine will be done." End of quote. As he finished his talk to the class, and he said in the voice of one who has had a revelation, quote, "Men, there is nothing wrong with religion. There is nothing wrong with God's love." End of quote. I have forgotten countless, thousands of talks since then, but I will never forget that one because it's of emotional impact. When I congratulated the speaker on his deeply moving talk, he replied, quote, "Yes, and I made it without any preparation." End of quote. Preparation? Well, if he hadn't prepared that talk, I didn't know what preparation is. He meant, of course, that He had no advance notice that he would have to talk on that subject. I am glad he didn't, because if he had advance notice, his talk might have been far less effective. He might have labored over it and tried to make a speech and been artificial. Instead, he did just what Gay Kellogg did years later. He stood up and opened his heart and talked like one human being conversing with another. The truth of the matter is that he was preparing himself to make that talk when he stood looking down into his mother's casket. He was preparing himself to make that talk when he knelt and wept and said the rosary. Living, feeling, thinking, enduring, quote, the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, end of quote. That is the finest preparation ever yet devised for either speaking or writing. Look inside yourself for topics to talk about. Do beginners know the necessity of looking inside themselves for topics? Know it? They never even heard of it. They are more likely to look inside a magazine for topics. For example, I remember meeting in the subway one day one of our students, a woman who was discouraged because she was making so little progress in the course. I asked her what she had talked about in the previous week. I discovered that she had talked about whether Mussolini should be permitted to invade Ethiopia. She had gotten her information out of an article in Time. She had read the article twice. I asked her if she was interested in the subject, and she said no. I then asked her why she had talked about it, and she, quote, well, she replied, I had to talk about something, so I chose that, end of quote. Think of it. Here was a woman who tried to speak about Mussolini's Ethiopian war, yet she admitted that she had little knowledge and no interest on the subject, and then she wondered why she was making slow progress in the course. All this time she had neglected to speak on the subjects that she had earned the right to talk about, subjects such as rearing children and managing a household on a minimum budget. After a discussion, I said to her, quote, Madam, I would listen with respect and interest if you spoke about how to rear children or how to make a dollar go farther in shopping, but neither I nor anyone else has the slightest desire to hear you discuss and try to interpret Mussolini's invasion on Ethiopia. You didn't know enough about it to merit our attention or our respect. End of quote. Talk from your heart, not from a book. Many students of public speaking are like that woman. They want to get their subjects out of a book or a magazine instead of out of their own knowledge and convictions. For example, a few years ago, I was one of the 3 judges in an intercollegiate speaking contest over National Broadcasting Company network. The judges never saw the speakers. We just listened to them from the Studio 8G in Radio City. Oh, how I wish that every student of the public speaking and every teacher of public speaking could have witnessed what went on in that studio. The first speaker spoke on, quote, democracy at the crossroads, end of quote. The next one spoke about, quote, how to prevent war, end of quote. And what did these 2 young college lads know about these tragic problems that were harassing and baffling many of these world leaders? If those college students knew the answer to those problems, they wouldn't belong in Harvard or Princeton. They belong in the White House or number 10 Downing Street. It was painfully evident that they were merely repeating carefully rehearsed and memorized words. So neither the guests in the studio nor the judges paid much attention to them. One of the judges was Wilhelm Hendrik van Loon. When he began drawing a cartoon of one of the girls in the studio, everyone stood and watched him and ignored the amateurish orations, the memorized words which were coming over the air. However, the next speaker caught my attention immediately. A young senior at Yale. He spoke about what was wrong with the colleges. He had earned the right to talk about that. We listened to him with respect. But the speaker who got the first prize began something like this, quote, I have just come from the hospital where a friend of mine is near death because of an automobile accident. Most automobile accidents are caused by the younger generation. I am a member of that generation and I want to speak to you about the causes of these accidents. End quote. Everyone in the studio was quiet as he spoke. He talked about realities, not trying to make a speech. He was speaking about something that he had earned the right to talk about. He was talking from the inside out. Have an eager desire to communicate. However, let me warn you that merely earning the right to talk about a subject will not always produce a superb talk. Another element must be added, an element that is dynamite in speaking. Briefly, it is this. In addition to earning the right to speak, we must have a deep and abiding desire to communicate our convictions and transfer our feelings to our listeners. To illustrate, suppose I were to ask to talk about raising corn and hogs. I spent 20 years on a corn and hog farm in Missouri, so surely I have earned the right to talk on that subject. But I don't have a special desire to communicate my ideas and convictions on that subject to you. But suppose I were to ask to speak on what was wrong with the kind of education I got in college. I could hardly fail if I talked on that subject because I would have the 3 basic requirements for a good speech. First, I would be talking about something that I have earned the right to talk about. Second, I would have a deep feeling and conviction that I long to convey to you. And third, I would have a clear and convincing illustration out of my own experience. When Gay Kellogg spoke on the biggest regrets of her life, never knowing a mother's love, she had not only earned the right through suffering to talk on that subject, but she also had a deep emotional desire to tell us about it. So did the class member who spoke on the Brooklyn Chamber of Commerce class about the death of his mother. Quote, not my will, but thine will be done. End quote. History has repeatedly been changed by men who had the desire and the ability to transfer their convictions and emotions to their listeners. If John Wesley had not had that desire and ability, he could never have founded a religious sect that had girdled the globe. If Peter the Hermit had not had the desire and ability, he could have never have stirred the imagination of the world and plunged Europe into the futile and bloody crusades for possession of the Holy Land. If Hitler had not initiated ability to transfer his hates and bitterness to his listeners, he could not have seized power in Germany and plunged it into war. Talk about your experiences. You are prepared right now to take at least a dozen good talks. Talks that no one else on the earth could make except you. because no one else has ever had precisely the same experience that you have had. What are these subjects? I don't know, but you do. So carry a sheet of paper with you for a few weeks and write down, as you think of them, all the subjects that you are now prepared to talk about through experience. Subjects as, quote, the biggest regret of my life, end of quote, or my biggest ambition, and why I like or dislike school. Do that and you will have surprisingly how quickly your list of topics will grow. Here is good news for you. Your progress as a speaker will depend far more on your choosing the right topic to talk about than about your native ability as a speaker. Almost anyone can feel at ease and make a fine talk immediately if he will not only do what Gay Kellogg did, if he will only talk about some experience that affected him deeply, some experience he has been thinking about for more than 20 years. But you may never feel completely at ease if you try to make speeches about, quote, Mussolini's invasion of Ethiopia or, quote, democracy at the crossroads, end quote. Talk about things you have studied. Talk about your own experiences as obviously the quickest way to develop courage and self-confidence. But after you have gained a little bit of experience, you will want to talk about other subjects. What subjects? And where can you find them? Everywhere. For example, I once asked a class of executives in New York Telephone Company to jot down every idea for a speech that occurred to them during the week. It was November. One man saw Thanksgiving Day printed in red on his calendar and spoke about the many things that he had to be grateful and thankful for. Another man saw some pigeons on the street. That gave him an idea. He spent a couple of evenings in the library and gave a talk about pigeons that I shall never forget. But the prize winner that night was a man who had been a bed bug crawling up a man's collar in the subway. Ooh. He went to the public library, uncovered some startling facts about bed bugs, and gave us a talk that I shall remember after 20 years. Carry a scribbling book. Why you don't do what Voltaire did. Voltaire, one of the most powerful writers of the 18th century, carried in his pocket what he called, quote, a scribbling book, end quote, a book in which he jotted down his fleeting thoughts and ideas. Why don't you carry a scribbling book? Then, if you're irritated by a discourteous clerk, or, for example, jot down the word discourteous in your scribbling book. Then try to recall 2 or 3 other striking examples of discourtesy. Pick the best one and tell us what we ought to do about it. Presto, you have a 2-minute talk on discourtesy. As soon as you begin to look for topics for talks, you will find them everywhere, in the home, the office, the street. Sing something simple. Don't attempt to speak on some world-shaking problem such as the, quote, atomic bomb, end quote. Take something simple. Almost anything will do, provided the idea gets you, instead of you getting the idea. For example, I recently heard a student of this course, Mary A. Lawyer from Chicago, talk on the, quote, back doors, end quote. You may find her talk dull as you read it, but if you had only listened to it, as I did, you would have loved it because she herself was positively excited about her back door. In fact, I never heard before anyone speak with such glowing enthusiasm about painting their back door. The point I'm trying to make about is this. Almost any subject will do for a talk, provided you yourself have earned the right to talk about it through study or experience and are excited about it and eager to tell us about it. This is the famous talk about back doors. Quote, 4 years ago, when I moved into my present apartment, the back door was painted a drab shade of gray. It was terrible. Every time I opened the back door, it gave me a depressing feeling. So I bought a can of beautiful blue paint and painted the outside of the back door with the jabs and the inside of the screen door. That paint was the most exquisite shade of blue that I had ever seen, and every time I opened the back door after that, it seemed as though I was looking upon a bit of heaven. I was never angry in my life than when I came home. One evening, not long after ago, I found that the house painter had pried open my screen door and painted my beautiful blue door a most hideous shade of putty gray. I could have cheerfully choked the painter. Quote, you can tell a lot more about a person from their back doors than you can from their front doors. Front doors are often painted up just to impress you, but back doors are telltales. A slovenly back door tattles on a slovenly household. But a back door that is painted in cheerful color and has pots of blooming plants sitting around and garbage cans that are painted and orderly, well, that kind of back door tells you that there is an interesting person with a lively imagination living behind it. I have already bought a can of beautiful blue paint, and next Saturday I'm going to have a glorious time. I am again going to make my back door cheerful and inspiring. End quote. And it goes. A huge book could be filled with examples to show the magic power of a speaker who, A, has earned the right by studying and experience to talk about his subject, B, is excited about themselves, and C, is eager to communicate their ideas and feelings to the listener. How to prepare and deliver your talks. Here are 8 rules that will help you immensely in preparing your tasks. Rule 1. Make brief notes of the interesting things you want to mention. Rule 2. Don't write out your talks. Why? Because if you do, you will use written language instead of easy conventional language. And when you stand up to talk, you will probably find yourself trying to remember what you wrote. That will keep you from speaking with a naturalness and sparkle. Rule 3. Never, never, never memorize a talk word or for a word. If you memorize your talk, you are almost sure to forget it, and the audience will probably be glad, for nobody wants to listen to a canned speech. Even if you don't forget it, it will sound memorized. You will have a faraway look in your eyes and a faraway ring in your voice. You won't sound like a human being trying to tell us something. If you're afraid, you will forget what you want to say, then make some brief notes and hold them in your hand and glance at them occasionally. That is what I usually do. Rule 4. Fill your talks with illustrations and examples. By far, the easiest way to make a talk interesting is to fill it with examples. To illustrate what I mean, let's take this booklet you are reading now. It has 21 pages of reading matter, and approximately half of those pages are devoted to illustrations. First, there is the illustration of Gay Kellogg's talk about the suffering she endured as a child. Next, the illustration of the speaker on, quote, what, if anything, is wrong with religion, end quote. And next, the example of the woman who tried to talk on Mussolini's invasion of Ethiopia. That is followed by the story of the 4 college students in a speaking contest over the radio, and so on. My biggest problem in writing a book or preparing a speech is not to get ideas, but to get illustrations to make those ideas clear, vivid, and unforgettable. The old Roman philosophers used to say, quote, exemplum docet, end quote. Or I guess exemplum docet. The example teaches, and how right they are. For example, let me illustrate the value of an illustration. Years ago, a congressman made a stormy speech accusing the government of wasting our money by printing useless pamphlets. He illustrated what he meant by saying the government had printed a pamphlet on, quote, the love life of the bullfrog, end quote. I would have forgotten that speech years ago if it hadn't been for the one specific illustration, quote, the love life of the bullfrog, end quote. I may forget a million other facts as the decades pass, but I will never forget his charge that the government wasted our money by printing and giving away pamphlets such as, quote, the love life of the bullfrog, end quote. Exemplum docet. Not only does the example teach, but it is about the only thing that does teach. I have heard brilliant speeches which I promptly forgot because there were no examples to make them stick in my memory. Rule 5. Know 40 times as much about your subject as you can use. Ida Tarbell, one of America's most distinguished writers, told me that years ago, while in London, she received a cable from S.S. McClure, the founder of McClure magazine, asking her to write a 2-page article on the Atlantic cable. Miss Tarbell interviewed the London manager of the Atlantic cable and got all the information necessary to write a 500-word article, but she didn't stop there. She went to the British Museum library and read magazine articles and books about the Atlantic cable and the biography of Cyrus West Field, the man who laid the Atlantic cable. She studied cross-sections of the cable and displayed on the British Museum and then visited a factory on the outskirts of London and saw cable being manufactured. Quote, when I finally wrote the 2 typewritten pages on the Atlantic cable, end quote, Miss Tarbell said, as she told me in the story, quote, I had enough material to write a small book about it, but the vast amount of material which I did not use enabled me to write what I did write about the confidence and clarity and interest. It gave me reserve power, end quote. Ida Tarbell had learned through the years of experience that she had to earn the right to even write a 500-page word about Atlantic cable. The same principle goes for speaking. Make yourself something of an authority on your subject. Develop that priceless asset known as reserve power. Rule 6. Rehearse your talk by conversing with your friends. Will Roger prepared his famous Sunday night radio talks by trying them out as conversation on the people he met during the week. If, for example, he were going to speak on the gold standard, he would wisecrack about it in some conversation during the week, and he would then discover which of his jokes went out or went over, which remarks excited people's interests. That is an infinitely better way to rehearse a talk than trying it out with gestures in front of a bathroom mirror. Rule 7. Instead of worrying about your delivery, get busy with the causes that produce it. Much harmful, misleading nonsense has been written about a delivery of the speech. The truth is that when you face an audience, you should forget all about voice, breathing, gestures, posture, emphasis. Forget everything except what you are saying. What listeners want, as Hamlet's mother said, is, quote, more matter with less art, end quote. Do what a cat does when she's trying to catch a mouse. She doesn't look around and say, I wonder how my tail looks, and I wonder if I'm standing right, and I wonder is my facial expressions. No, oh no. That cat is so intent on catching a mouse for dinner that she couldn't stand wrong or look wrong if she tried. And neither can you if you are so vitally interested in your audience and in what you are saying that you forget yourself. Don't imagine that expressing your ideas and emotions before an audience is something that requires years of technical training, such as you have devoted to mastering music or painting. Anybody can make a splendid talk at home when he is angry. If someone hauled off and knocked you down, for instance, you would get up and make a superb talk. Your gestures, your posture, and your facial expressions would be perfect because they would be the expressions of emotion. And remember, you don't have to learn to express your emotions. You could express your emotions superbly when you were 6 months old. Ask any mother. Watch a group of children at play. What a fine expression. What perfect emphasis, gestures, postures, communication. Jesus said, quote, except ye become as little children, ye cannot enter the kingdom of heaven. End quote. Yes, and except you become as natural and spontaneous and as free as these little children at play, you cannot enter the kingdom of good expression. If your attitude is right, your talk will be. Your problem isn't trying to talk or how to learn to gesture and how to stand and how to speak with emphasis. Those are merely effects. Your problem is to deal with the cause that produces those effects. That cause is deep down inside you. It is your own mental and emotional attitude. If you get yourself in the right mental and emotional condition, you will speak superbly. You won't have to make any effort to do it. You will do it as naturally as you breathe. To illustrate, a Rear Admiral of United States Navy once took this course. He had commanded a squadron of the United States fleet during the First World War. He wasn't afraid to fight a battle, but he was so afraid to face an audience that he made weekly trips from his home to New Haven, Connecticut, New York City to attend these courses. Half a dozen sessions went by and he was still terrified. So, one of our instructors, Professor Elmer Nyberg, had an idea that might make an admiral come out of his shell. There was a radical in the class. Professor Nyberg took him to one side and said, quote, I wonder if you will be good enough to make a strong talk to support your philosophy of government. Obviously, you will make the admiral angry, which is exactly what I want. He will forget himself, and in his eagerness to refute your position, he will probably make a good talk." End of quote. The radical said, quote, "Sure, I'd be glad to." End of quote. He had not gone far in this talk when the rear admiral leaped to his feet and shouted, quote, "Stop, stop, that's sedition." End of quote. Then he gave a fiery talk on how much each of us owes to our country and its freedom. Professor Nyberg turned to the Navy officer and said, "Congratulations, Admiral. A magnificent talk." The rear admiral snapped back, "I am not making a talk. I am telling that little whippersnapper a thing or two." Then the Professor Nyberg explained that it had all been a put-up job to get the admiral out of his shell and make him forget himself. This rear admiral discovered just what you will discover when you get stirred up about a cause bigger than yourself. You will discover that all fears of speaking will vanish and that you don't have to give a thought to delivery, since the cause that produces good delivery are working for you irresistibly. Let me repeat. Your delivery is merely the effect of a cause that preceded and produced it. So, if you don't like your delivery, don't muddle around trying to change it. Get back to the fundamentals and change the cause that produced it. Change your mental and emotional attitude. Rule 8. Don't imitate others. Be yourself. I first came to New York to study at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. I aspired to be an actor. I had what I thought was a brilliant idea, a shortcut to success. My campaign to achieve excellence was so simple, so foolproof, that I was unable to comprehend why thousands of ambitious people hadn't already discovered it. It was this. I would study how the famous actors of the day, like John Drew and E.H. Sothern and Walter Hampton and Otis Skinner, how they got their effects. Then I would imitate their best points of each of them and make myself into their shining triumph combination of all of them. How silly, how absurd, and how tragic. I had to waste years of my life imitating other people before I penetrated my thick Missouri skull that I had to be myself and that I couldn't possibly be anyone else. To illustrate what I mean, a number of years ago I set out to write the best book on public speaking for businessmen that had ever been written, and I had the same foolish idea about writing this book that I had formerly had about acting. I was going to borrow the idea of a lot of other writers and put them all in one book, a book that would have everything. So I got scores of books on public speaking and spent a year incorporating their ideas into my manuscript. But it finally dawned on me once again that I was playing the fool. This hodgepodge of other men's ideas that they had written was so synthetic, so dull that no businessman would ever plod through it. So I tossed a year's worth of work into the wastebasket and started all over again. This time I said to myself, quote, "You've got to be Dale Carnegie with all his faults and limitations. You can't possibly be anybody else." End of quote. So I quit trying to be the combination of other men and rolled up my sleeve and did what I could and should have done in the first place. I wrote a textbook on public speaking out of my own experience and observation and convictions. Why don't you profit from my silly waste of time? Don't try to imitate others. Don't be afraid of being yourself. Be yourself. Act on the sage advice that Irving Berlin gave in the late George Gershwin. When Berlin and Gershwin first met, Berlin was famous, but Gershwin was a struggling young composer working for $35 a week in a tin-pan alley. Berlin, impressed by Gershwin's ability, offered Gershwin a job as a musical secretary at almost 3 times the salary he was getting. Quote, but didn't take the job, quote, end quote, Berlin advised. Quote, if you do, you may develop a second-rate Berlin, but if you insist on being yourself, someday you'll find a first-rate Gershwin, end quote. Gershwin heeded that warning and slowly transformed himself into one of the most significant American composers of his generation. Quote, be yourself, don't imitate others, end quote. That is sound advice in music, in writing, and speaking. You are something new in this world. Be glad of it. Never before since the dawn of time has anybody been exactly like you. And never again throughout all the ages to come will there ever again be anybody exactly like you. So make the most of your individuality. Your speech should be a part of you, the very living tissue of you. It should grow out of your experiences, your conviction, your personality, your way of life. In this last analysis, all art is autobiographical. You can sing only what you are. You can paint only what you are. You can write only what you are. You can speak only what you are. You must be what you experience. Your environment and your heredity have made you. For better or for worse, you must cultivate your own little garden. For better or for worse, you must play your own little instrument in the orchestra of life. As Emerson said in his essay of self-reliance, quote, there is a time in every man's education when he arrives at the conviction that the envy is ignorance, that imitation is suicide, that he must take himself, or better, for worse, as his portion, that although the wide universe is full of good, no kernel of nourishing corn can come to him but through his toil bestowed on the plot of ground of which he is given him to toil. The power which resides in him in the new in nature, and none of which he knows what that is which he can do, nor does he know until he has tried. End of quote. In a nutshell, how to make rapid and easy progress in learning to speak in public. Speak about something that A, you have learned and earned the right to talk about through study and experience. B, you are excited about. And C, you are eager to tell your listeners about. Make brief notes of the interesting things you want to mention. 2, don't write out your talks. 3, never, never, never memorize a talk or for a word. 4, fill your talk with illustrations and examples. 5, know 40 times as much about your subject as you can use. 6, rehearse your talks by conversing with your friends. 7. Instead of worrying about your delivery, get busy with the cause that produced it. And 8. Don't imitate yourself. Don't imitate others. Be yourself. And thus concludes A Quick and Easy Way to Learn to Speak in Public by Dale Carnegie. I do hope you enjoyed.